Thank you very much. Yeah, we are not mammal specific. You can use these on lots of animals, and actually birds are usually, we've had a lot of studies using birds. So although I am a mammal person, if you are a bird person, they also work. And we also have them on things like lizards and stuff. So the options are there. So thank you very much for the invitation to talk about this technology. What I thought, so the agenda for today, to run through it, full caveat, this is the first time we've given a workshop like this, so any feedback is really gratefully received because we are very new on the block, I would say, and the loggers that I'm presenting, they were really born out of a need that I had in my own research. I went to the engineering department and said, can you help me solve this? They gave me a fantastic master's student who basically developed these loggers as his master's project about 4 years ago on about 2,000 euros. That was the budget we had to do it. And yeah, he's been working on it ever since, still works on it in his own time. And that's how we have the system that we have. So this is really a system that has been designed by researchers for researchers to collect this kind of movement and proximity data. So there's a lot of moving parts to it, and that's why I thought maybe the first thing to do is I'll go over the system, explain how it works, go over all the different parts are. We have got a demo, but actually you will have loggers on your tables, so you can also have a little play with them once we go into a little bit more depth. And then I'm going to talk about different aspects, like important parts of using the system, like how you calibrate it, how you prepare the loggers to go on animals, how you analyze the data, and then some examples of how people have been using the loggers so far. I'm also going to talk about how the system compares to others, pros and cons. I'm a researcher. I don't want to spend my precious grant money on something that isn't going to work, so we are incredibly upfront. We like to talk to everybody before they use the system. If we don't think it's going to collect the data that you need, we will tell you not to buy it because it's no use, right? Like, we only want people using the system to collect data that it's appropriate for. So I can also kind of really highlight where the gap is that this system fills compared to others. And then together we can kind of think about designing a logger study. Like, if you have a question, how would you do it? What would you use it for? Would it work for you? Or is there another tool out there that would work better? And we have quite a lot of knowledge around this, also because I'm really passionate about conservation technology. I think it's a really exciting field of research and of development. And there are so many cool options like this that are being developed by people who are just really passionate that allow us to have like amazing new insights into animal behavior. Before we begin, I wanted to get an idea of what sorts of things people are working on, just to have an idea of how to pitch the session. So when we say small animals, we mean 20, 25 grams. The loggers are 1 gram. So that's so that tells you how small an animal they can go on. So we normally say about 20 grams is the minimum, but people know their study systems. Sometimes they want to put them on smaller animals with caveats, and then we defer to their knowledge there. But just to get a general idea, do people mostly work on large animals? Hands up, yeah, mostly larger. What, like medium-sized animals? Small animals? Okay, so quite a range. Are they mammals, mostly? Mostly mammals. Birds? Any bird people? There's always some bird people. Any other out there? Anyone else work with something different they want to share? Butterfly, oh, they're a little bit too small. We're not there yet. Anything else? No? Do feel free, I will get through all the technical parts first, and then we can open it up and have it more like an informal discussion kind of thing. But I'll get through the technical parts first because probably you have a question that then gets answered in the next bit as we go through. One other question. Are you working on mostly terrestrial animals? Yeah. Aerial? Anyone working on aerial animals? Any other options, like aquatic or anything like that? An aquarium? So I will say now, this is a Bluetooth-based technology. Bluetooth doesn't transmit well through water. So previously, we've always been saying, no, it won't work. But people have decided to take our loggers and test them anyway. And they are starting to get some results. So like every system, we say there are like positives and yeah, like ways where they work and ways where they don't. Water is a tricky environment for this Bluetooth system, but it turns out people are still able to get results. So again, it would depend on your question. But we're doing some really interesting experiments in the aquariums at Bangor to try and really understand exactly how much these loggers really do transmit. So shared here, but you have all got the QR codes on your tables, so you can use those to log on. And so there's a few different activities that we can look at. So case building, I'm going to touch on that. You'll see there's very Blue Peter-esque for those in the UK, for those who don't know, some kind of like hobbycraft situation going on your tables. That's thinking about how you're actually going to see all the loggers. Then we're going to talk about the app and also about how you would actually design a study to use these loggers. So this kind of gives an overview of the system. Like I said, it's Bluetooth based, so it's kind of like if you imagine, or if you remember those COVID proximity tracing apps. So we started working on this just before COVID, but then actually everybody having these Bluetooth proximity tracing apps made it really easy to explain how the system works, because it's very, very similar in that it's, you have your loggers, they are shouting their own ID periodically, and then every so often they scan, they listen for another ID in the environment. That's how these loggers work. The listening is really energy intensive. That's what takes up all the battery life. So that happens every so often, and then in between that, they're advertising. They're shouting their own ID into the environment. That takes much less battery. Then we have all kinds of modifications about how you then manage that to optimize your battery life, because if you're talking about putting something on a 20-gram animal, you need to be extremely cautious about your battery consumption. That's what a lot of this is about. So the way the system works itself, we have the micro loggers, what we call them. These are the really small animal trackers. If you look on your table, you should see some tiny loggers. Feel free to, so these ones here, feel free to pick them up and have a look. These tiny ones on your tables are actually all duds because they're quite expensive, so I didn't want them to get broken accidentally. So have a look on your table. You can see the little ones. You have a few different battery sizes. So the ones with the tiny batteries, they're obviously our smallest ones. And then we do a couple of other battery sizes for your animals that are a little bit larger, can tolerate a bit more weight. So that's what goes on the animal generally. Then we have what we call stationary loggers. These are larger ones. So you've got a larger example on your table there, the black coated one. That's what we call a stationary logger. You put that in the environment. That's listening for other loggers, and it basically detects when they're nearby. And you can put that out in like a grid, or you can put that next to a resource that you're interested in, but that gives you that information about the spatial movement. Because they have big batteries on, they run for months. They're like literally months, and you can set them to scan really frequently. So you can get really high resolution temporal data about what your animals are doing. The ones that you've got on the table there, they're our version 1. We now have versions 2, which are these two here, and that's because of the change in range. So you can see they're bigger. This one's got an internal antenna, this one's got the external antenna. You basically get a lot more range for it, so it changes the spatial area over which you can collect your data. Also improves the accuracy a bit, we think. Something we're now working on in the algorithm side of things to try and improve the accuracy. But like I said, this is a passion project, so I have an intern at the moment who's kind of trying to figure out a lot of this stuff. Oh, apologies. Then the next thing we have is the gateway. This scans the environment, and anytime it sees a stationary or a mobile logger, it records it. It tells you how many logs are on that recorder. It downloads the logs, so you don't have to recover the loggers again to get your data. It's all handled by the gateway. And it also tells you what the battery life is of any loggers that it sees. So you can keep an eye on the battery life without actually having to get close to your animals and contact their loggers. The gateway does it all for you. It's got a big antenna, downloads over hundreds of meters, so that's quite a useful device. You put that somewhere where you know the animals are going to go. So that's a really important part of just synchronizing the system and keeping it all in check. And then we've got the mobile phone app, and this is the app for how you set up your parameters, how you customize your loggers, and you've got loads of options there. And altogether, that makes our entire system. So this is the mobile logger. You've got some on your table. As you can see, they're tiny with these little LiPo batteries. They are rechargeable. We have a custom charger because it's incredibly difficult to make something that small rechargeable. This has been a major challenge for us. Although they are rechargeable, realistically, they're very delicate. Animals are not delicate. And so we find once or twice used in the field, often they die because yeah, animals are a bit rough with them. They chew them, they knock them around. And ultimately, something this lightweight and small is not going to last forever. So it's something to remember. We say they're rechargeable. They are rechargeable, but realistically, animals wreck them. Or in fact, as our engineer found out, ecologists also wreck them. We're not the gentlest people, and I think that was quite shocking for our engineer to realise. Like I said, we've got these stationary loggers, so you've got these 3 different options. What's nice with these ones is that you can actually use them as, so you can use all of them as mobile loggers, but these stationary loggers, this version 1 here, you can actually use them as mobile loggers as well. So you just change the settings, and if you've got a larger animal, so this is a sheep experiment that we have running at the moment, so this is the collar that goes on sheep, and that works really well because it's got a much larger battery life, so you can record an awful lot of contacts. We have a battery life calculator, so I can't tell you exactly what your battery life will be, but like I said, this can record every 10 seconds, and you get months out of it, so I'm forever looking at my phone and realizing I've got some going somewhere in the room that I don't know where they are, but they've been running for a while. For the mobile loggers, for the little ones, it's a lot more, yeah, they don't last anywhere near as long. So for the tiniest ones, if you log every minute, then you get about 10 days. So it's still quite a lot of time if you compare that to a GPS, but it's not the same as one of these big ones. So that's why we tend to find, if you've got larger animals, we would recommend using one of these devices. So the gateway, this is basically what controls everything. They are a really important bit of kit because they also keep all the loggers in sync. So the loggers will naturally just gradually go out of sync. That's what happens with the technology that's in there. And so the gateways also put everything back in sync so that you know that your timestamps are correct. And that's really important. So the app is really, there's an awful lot going on in there. There's lots that you can do. Can people open the app? So you should then go, are you on Apple? Yeah. So then you go back to the previous screen and it should tell you what to do. Normally if it says, have you got the invite code, you've gone a step too far and have to go back. Are other people in the app? Yeah? So when you open the app, you can see lots of loggers, right? And you've got little pictures. So you've got what looks like a lookout. That tells you that's a stationary logger. And if you see a little bird, that tells you that's a mobile logger. So already just looking at them, you can kind of tell. You might have to press the... you have the swirl in the corner. The arrows in the corner that look like a circle, press that and it will scan and find all your loggers if you've got Bluetooth on. Does it work for you?
It's scanning nothing. Maybe.
No, because I have them all. You have Bluetooth on? You have to have Bluetooth on to work, yeah? Yeah, it's a Bluetooth system, so if your Bluetooth is not on, it won't detect them. So you should see lots of loggers. And so this is really the point at which you can control them, and they are really customizable, and we're going to have a little play with that later. But you can already see, like, you have lots of options and lots of information on the screen about the loggers. Your phone does not have as good a Bluetooth antenna as these bits of kit here. So these bits of kit will actually pick loggers up from further away than your phone will, because it depends on how good the Bluetooth antenna is in your phone. So that's kind of a run through of the system. What the data looks like, I should mention that, is what you get is the sender ID, so the ID of the logger that was advertising itself. You've got the receiver ID, so that's the ID of the logger that heard it. You've got the timestamp, and then you have something called the RSSI, that's the received signal strength. So that gives you an idea of how close the loggers are to each other. It's not linear with distance. Wish it would be, but Bluetooth is a noisy signal. So this is why we have to do the calibration steps. And that's because in different environments, your Bluetooth signal is going to be distorted. And so you have to basically do different steps at different distances to get an idea of the distance bins that your data falls into. So yeah, so calibrating really aims to identify this relationship, to understand what this relationship is between how far you've moved the logger and what the distance actually is. You're not going to get centimetre accuracy, so it's not possible. It is possible if you have a load of money and you can afford a lot of antenna arrays, but yeah. It's not possible to do in a low-cost system like this. So yeah, so this is sort of something that we always say to do in every environment. You want to differ between on the floor and up in the air. So this is why I ask if you have terrestrial versus aerial species that you're working with. If you have a terrestrial species, the range between your loggers is going to be smaller because the ground absorbs loads of Bluetooth signal. So if you have species that go underground that burrow, like my mice, you lose a lot of signal. So then it's quite hard to find them. It's quite frustrating. So it's really, when thinking about how to use the system, it's really thinking, okay, well, how is the Bluetooth signal going to be propagated in this environment? Because that's going to make a difference to the kind of data that you can get. So if you have animals that will move along the ground and also maybe arboreally, we always say, okay, you want to test along the ground. You also want to elevate your loggers. You want to move them at an elevation. You also need to think about the size of the animal. Again, why I asked about the size, because a small animal is basically on the ground when they're really tiny, like my mice. But when I'm working with the sheep, the logger's up high anyway, so the distance that you get, the range is different because the logger is away from the ground. Less of the signal is being absorbed by the ground. So these sort of factors become really important to take into account. And then what you get when you calibrate the system is you get these kinds of relationships. So this is the data from this experiment here. I've got the version 2 loggers here. I've got a version 1 logger here, and I've got a mobile logger moving along the ground, and this is a measuring tape. So this is just in a field near where our sheep are in Bangor. And you can see for the different types of loggers, you get these different relationships. And this is kind of what I mean about the relationship not being linear and it being fairly noisy. So you have to manage expectations about like what the data is actually recording. And so this is a mobile logger to mobile logger. So imagining a small animal coming to close proximity with a small animal. And actually at the beginning, you can see for over short distances, it is pretty linear. And we're actually pretty confident with a lot of the experiments that we've done where we've also recorded the animals, that we know when you get certain signal strengths, say -50 or above, those animals are basically on top of each other or very, very close. So for my mice, for example, when I see an RSSI like that, I know that there is a breeding event going on because that's the only time those mice are sitting next to each other that calmly or with that little fighting. So you can kind of already get a good idea, okay, these guys are very close. And then -60 or above, we say, okay, they're within about 10 centimetres of each other. And we've seen this in 3 or 4 different systems that we've tested it. So we're fairly confident that this seems pretty consistent, actually. -60 or above with the small loggers, they're about 10 centimetres. And then, okay, you can start to say maybe they're going out to 30 centimetres from each other once you get to kind of -75 or above. But once you get below this line, you can see any differentiation is going to become really hard. So you just know that they're maybe within 80 centimetres, 1 metre of each other, but you can't tell much more than that. And so this is why this calibration step is so important, because it really depends about what kind of data do you want. Do you want to know if they're coming like really close to each other, or do you just care about vicinity? And yeah, this becomes key. But what's really nice here is, so like again in my system, knowing this and having this calibration has allowed us to see when there are these affiliative or these mating events going on versus actually antagonistic events, and you see actual fighting that you can pick up in whether you've got a very stable signal like here, or whether you've got something that fluctuates and suggests that they're moving away, coming close together, moving away, coming close together. So there is a lot of information that you can get. Likewise, these are for the stationary loggers. And again, you can see, okay, it looks fairly linear. This is because my intern is actually still completing some of these measurements because these are very new loggers for us. But you can again see that actually there's an awful lot of noise, and being able to confidently predict with meter accuracy just isn't something you can do with Bluetooth signals. So that's something to remember. However, if you set the loggers out in a grid, you can actually use different statistical approaches to pull that information out. So there are post-processing things that you can do. before I go, does anyone have any questions about the system? Because I realise I've gone through that all quite quickly and there's an awful lot of information, but I think it becomes clearer when you play with it. But are there any questions about the system, how it works? Yeah?
So it's mostly used for determining how close animals are to each other and not necessarily where they are.
So it's being used for both. But you have to think, you set it up differently depending on what your question is. Quite often people want both, right? They want to know, they want to know where the animals are coming close together. But we do have some really nice examples of actually where people are just tracking spatial movements, like bats, for example, flying around woodlands. People have been able to use these to actually track their movements. But if you're going to use it for spatial stuff, it's much coarser than for the proximity stuff. So that's just something to bear in mind.
So there's no GPS in there?
No GPS.
How difficult would it have been to put in GPS?
Impossible. Really? There is a reason why GPSs... They come very small. You get about 4 points, and then you have to recover the tracker to get the data. And you can get ones now that you can get more points, but you have to recover the logger to get the data off, because actually sending that data off the logger is really energetically expensive. And I don't recover my loggers most of the time from my mice.
So it's data capacity that's the
yeah.
And broadcast of that.
Yeah, yeah, how you broadcast the data. Because there's also systems like Sigfox, LORAN, those kind of systems, LORA. They don't actually have enough, they don't send enough data at a time for the resolution of data that we get. So we looked into those systems and found they didn't actually help, because you get so much data from this that offloading becomes the tricky bit. So yeah, so this, I'll come to this in the kind of pros and cons. You do kind of need to know where your animals are in order to use this system. But that being said, these are now looking like they have a transmission range of about 100 meters. So you can imagine you can set up quite a wide grid with that, whereas previously we were working on much smaller grids. So yeah. Any other questions before we go on? No? Oh. Yep, so this is just so the latest experiments. So the latest data I have from my intern is that we're still seeing the logs at 90 plus meters. So we don't actually fully know how far the system goes yet, but you can see how noisy it is, right? So at this point, you're only able to say that they're somewhere within, I mean, where does the noise kick in? Between 10 and 60 meters. So that's the kind of coarseness of information you get from one. Like I said, there are statistical approaches to improve this. We are playing with different smoothing algorithms to try and get more information out of the system. And we've only recently started using the external antenna on these stationary loggers, and we think that's going to improve things as well, because this is an omnidirectional antenna. So yeah, work to come. Okay. So that's kind of the system, all the different parts. There's lots of ways that you can play with it to get your data. But full caveat, straight up, you're not going to get beautifully sealed package loggers ready for you to put onto your animals. We don't have the capacity to do that. And we kind of also think, well, everybody knows how to put, like, you're the expert of working with your animals. So we defer to the knowledge of the people who are actually working with them to know what's possible. There are some things that are really important to consider, though. We do always provide the loggers with what's called a conformal coating. This is the first coating to give them waterproofing, because they are super sensitive to humidity. This is not sufficient. So even though we give them this first coating, if you put this out on an animal, it would just destroy it. Like, you need to put something more on it. But yeah, this is the kind of thing that we use. I was going to bring a few different sealants with me, but they don't like you flying with them. So they're really fussy about you taking some of these chemicals on flights, apparently. So yeah, I didn't. One of the things that we really recommend is something called Plastidip. So I don't know if you guys have come across this, but it's just like a liquid rubber. It's quite good. It's really easy to seal, so you can just dip the loggers in it and they get a nice waterproof seal. You can get it in a spray, or you can get it in a kind of liquid pot. I recommend the pot. I think that does a better job of sealing it personally. But what's really nice about it is that you can remove it. So you can dip them, seal them completely, including the charging ports, and then you can remove it so that you can charge. Now, it's worth noting the charging ports on the loggers. If I just borrow this one. If you look closely at the really little loggers, you see a white dashed line that says, God, like old lady style. That's the charging port, that bit there. You can leave that unsealed, because if it gets wet, it won't short. It's, you know, it's made so that you can leave it unsealed. But if your animal chews on it and you can't then recharge it, really annoying. So we do recommend putting something on that, but something that you can then remove, and Plasti Dip is quite a good option for that. The other options that you have are things like these resins. So they're very strong. You're looking for like shore hardness. So they're these, you know, sort of two chemicals you mix together and then they harden very quickly. You want to always use the pure system, PUR system here. If you're going to use them, if you are buying any loggers from us, we will always have a really good discussion about these different options, because I have learned the hard way that some resins really impact the Bluetooth signal. So we will tell you which ones we know work and which ones we know to avoid, because yeah, we have quite a lot of experience. They weigh quite a lot, so they add quite a lot of weight. So it's something to really consider for the animal that you're putting them on, that it's not just the weight of the logger, it's the weight of the surrounding that makes a big difference as well. So like for my mice, I have to put this on because they chew so much, and they will chew through metal given the chance. But then it really limits the mice that I can put it on, because it adds quite a bit of weight. Another option that we've only recently discovered is UV resins. So these are basically the things that they use to make flies for fly fishing. Again, there are particular ones that we know work, and those are the ones that we would share. They're very strong, and you can get a very thin layer, and they set very quickly. So you can use a UV light to set them. I mean, you can use sunlight, but if you have an actual UV light, like the one you use for looking for scorpions or something, that works really well. So you can get a very quick set that then means that your loggers are much more protected. And I have been like asking for like 3 years what on earth they were using in like GPS tags, and I've only recently found out that this is what it is. So I'm really chuffed that we finally know this. Cons, you can't remove it. So once it's on, so you have to be really careful about how you put it on, but once it's on, you've got a lightweight and pretty solid seal. A few things that are really important to remember when you're sealing the loggers. So I have also put a picture of this on the table, like just so people remember, like this is, like I said, this is the charging ports. So you don't want to cover that with something you can't remove, because you won't be able to recharge them. And then this is the antenna, this little bit that pokes out here. And if you put any metal behind the antenna, you block the signal. So you don't want to do that either. So this is what we call the battery safe zone. You basically want to fix your battery somewhere over here. Never under here, because you will really damage your signal. Not under here, because then you can't put it in the charger. So you want to basically leave, those bits free. You can put it like, you know, you can, if it's easier to have it bent open so that they're not actually sit together. We've got some people doing that with marine iguanas. They're kind of opening them up and putting them either side, which is quite a cool way to do it. So there's like plenty of options, as long as you leave these bits clear. That's really the most important. Another tip, do not seal them with duct tape. Duct tape, like the silver duct tape, actually has metal fibers in it. We didn't know this until somebody used duct tape to attach the loggers, and then said, oh, they're not working. And we found out there's tiny metal fibers. So that then blocks the signal, because metal blocks the signal of Bluetooth quite a lot. So like I said, it's all these different things that we have learned along the way that we always share to say, don't do these things because they will damage your signal. Any questions on sealants? We're going to have like an actual play with the different options that we've used later anyway, but just at the moment, any questions? No? We do have also little 3D printed bars, because it's quite tricky getting the resin on them. So we have little 3D printed bars that you can use to like dip the loggers and stuff, just to try and make it a little bit easier. But it is all a little bit like fixing for your species. So the next thing I want to talk about is, okay, you've sealed them, you've made them proof for your animal, you've thought about, okay, are they going to peck, are they going to chew? Something I didn't mention in the sealing, something that works really well for birds is heat shrink. So actually, if you've just got heat shrink, because when you heat shrink and it contracts, it makes a very hard seal that the birds find quite hard to peck against. So if you're working with birds, rodents will chew straight through that in a second, but birds, that seems to work really well. So heat shrink is quite a good approach as well to use. And yeah, we've used that in quite a few different options. But yeah, again, putting them on the animals, really depends on the species. So for birds, we've always made these little backpacks. So both the starling and the great tit here are wearing different backpacks, again in heat shrink. And then for like other species like these sea lions, this is actually a project out in the Galapagos where they've been using them for a couple of years now in combination with GPS. So if you want GPS, you can combine them. They don't interfere with each other. And it was quite cool because she lost one of the loggers, so she couldn't recover the GPS data, but she actually used the mobile phone app and the Bluetooth signal to home in and find it stuck down a rock so that she could get the data back. So in combination, they can work quite nicely as well. But yeah, here it's much more specialist, using 3D printed approaches. And again, like if you have something that you know works for your animals, you can talk to, we have a 3D printer, so we can print things, but we don't know how to stick all these things on all these different animals, and we don't have the capacity to know that. So yeah, we can discuss that, I guess, if people have different species that they're thinking about. Any questions? No, okay. There's the picture gone. Okay, so collecting the data, there's supposed to be a picture of the data being collected in the field. Collecting the data is really easy. You put the loggers on the animals, you release the animals, you put your gateway out, that's it. So I would always check your gateway because you want to make sure your system is working, but all the data is downloaded onto an SD card on the gateway, and so actually that's the only thing you really need to liaise with. You can leave the animals alone. And I think that's quite a useful, well, it works for me because I never see my animals again. So they're a bit like, catch me once, shame on me, you're never catching me again. But I think it's quite useful, particularly like, for example, with the vulture breeding program that we work with, they don't want to interfere with those birds. They don't want to go too close to those birds. So the fact that you can just set everything through the gateway is quite useful. Analyzing the data. So you've got your data, you've put it out. You get hundreds of thousands of lines of data, so you're not short on data on this approach, but then you have to make something of it, right? Okay, you've got all this data, what does it mean? So if you're looking at the proximity data, one of the things that we kind of recommend is to use social network plots. So just you can look at things like, so this is very originally boys in blue, the females in pink, and this is a social network plot from some of the mice that's just based on their proximity. And so where you've got the thick black lines, that's where they had higher RSSI, so they were closer to each other based on the RSSI. And then the actual, if they don't have a line between them, they didn't come into contact. So you can build quite nice networks. From those networks, you can actually calculate communities. So this is from another experiment where we looked at the stability of the networks and the communities through density changes in the mice. And you can get these, like, you can see that stable communities develop and then the others actually really avoid each other. So you can get quite a lot of information out of that. From that, you can also extract key measures. So betweenness, centrality, you can identify the individuals that are really important for transmitting information in a group, for example, based on these relationships. And what's really nice is you don't have to be observing the animals to do this, right? This is being collected 24/7 without you being there. So you're able to look at these over time as well. And then you can also combine it with the spatial data. Any questions on social network plots? Do people use social network, this sort of thing, a lot when you're doing proximity data? Yeah. We provide snippets of R code, so all of the coding is done in R and Python, but we provide snippets of R and Python as well to help people do it. And one day, if I have time, there will be an R package, but that's been a dream for like 4 years. So, and I'm not getting more time as time goes on. But we do have we have all the snippets and the functions for people to use to be able to do these analyses and look at their data. If you're looking at the spatial data, you can create heat maps. So this is, again, this is where I'm saying if you lay out the grid or you have your loggers in different points, then you can use these kind of algorithmic approaches to get these nice heat maps of movement and knowing where the animals are. And there's a few different approaches you can use for this. And with these approaches, you can also extract information like range, movement. You can use them in demographic models. So again, you can get quite a lot from them. And then you can also just explore the data through lots of different plots. So you can look at affiliative relationships. So this is just plotting different loggers against each other to see how the relationships match. So you can see the individuals that really like each other, the individuals that really don't like each other. It's done by the darkness of the colour. You can also look at bird interaction. So this was bird interactions in relation to a particular nest box where we put the stationary logger. And you can see that this bird was interacting with all of the others in the flock. It had particular favourites, so the blue and the pink bird here it was spending an awful lot of time with. But at night, it was in this nest box with the blue bird. So this was on a starling experiment in November when the starlings weren't supposed to be doing anything in the aviary. They were doing so much, but it was all at night. So I was trying to do observations on them during the day to match their behaviour to what we were getting from the loggers. Saw very little. Looked at the loggers and you're like, aha, that's because you're all sneaking around at night. So then we put camera traps on the nest boxes at night, and there was so much swapping going on that, yeah, we hadn't realised. But from the camera traps, actually, it wasn't good enough quality to know which bird it was. So having the loggers there was really useful because we knew exactly which birds it was associating with each other. So we got a lot more information than we had from just watching them or from just using the camera traps because, yeah, you just couldn't tell which animal it was doing it. So you can look at resource use. You can try and identify these antagonistic versus affiliative interactions. And to be honest, everyone who uses them, they usually have their own thing that they want to do. So I'm just going to finish with a couple of example studies. How am I doing for time? Yeah. A few example studies, just sort of give an idea of how they're being used at the moment. Firstly, my baby, understanding disease transmission in mice, why they were actually developed. So this is the enclosure that we put them in because, like I said, it's not GPS. If I release the mice into the wild, I'd never see them again. So we release them into an enclosure, and even then they still don't go in our traps. And I have lovely camera trap footage of them climbing on and around the traps, but not going in because they know what happens. And this is because these mice in Tanzania, where I work, they transmit quite a few horrible diseases like plague, leptospirosis. We're really interested in understanding how their contact behaviour changes during periods of density and how that relates to disease spillover. And so that was why we actually started developing the loggers. The loggers needed to be below 1 gram because these mice are small. We needed data recovery without recapturing the individuals, and we needed the social and spatial movements. So that's where a lot of these things came from because it was answering this original use case. Another study that we've been doing for quite a while. So this is in collaboration with Plankendale Zoo in Belgium. And we're now extending the work to 3 other aviaries where we're working with Ruppel's vulture as well. And here it's using the loggers as part of a captive breeding program. So they're trying to identify which birds actually like each other because apparently vultures are incredibly choosy and it's very difficult to know which ones actually want to be friends. And what was really interesting with this was that we actually put the loggers on just before the COVID pandemic hit. So we had data from when, before the pandemic, where visitors were going to the zoo and where the keepers were going to the zoo. And then we have data from when no visitors were allowed. And this breeding aviary is actually alongside where people queued to go into the zoo. So we saw a real change in the birds' behaviour as the visitors were no longer around. And the other thing you could see is that the birds really responded to the zookeepers going there. So actually, when the zookeepers went to do their observations to try and figure out which birds liked each other, the birds were changing their behaviour anyway, because they obviously associate the zookeepers with like food, or they're wondering what's going on. So or they did actually manage to identify pairs through the loggers that they hadn't identified through observation just because they changed their behaviour. So this is something that's really nice, right? Because ideally we have eyes on our animals 24/7 to know what's going on, but that's very expensive or very difficult to analyse. And this gives you an insight into a part of that without without you having to watch them, without you having to go through video footage. It's much quicker than doing that. So this is really nice. So we're now working with the Ripples vulture as well. And I think there are plans to kind of create a manual of how to use these loggers in these kind of captive breeding situations, which is very cool. The other thing that was nice with this is obviously because it's a visitor experience, they wanted the attachments to be very unobtrusive, so we worked to develop these 3D printed rings. So this is an example of where we can help to create these bespoke loggers, and then we will always advise you on how to make sure they're actually sealed properly so that the loggers still work. This was quite cool. This was a citizen science project with the Port of Antwerp. They wanted to know where the natterjack toads were as part of some of the surveys that they were doing. And they have really motivated volunteers. So we actually built them a bespoke app that created like a toad version of Pokemon Go, where the volunteers could go out and look for the toads, and they got like points based on how many toads they found, and they would go out and find them all. And in the background, we were harvesting information about where the toads were and where they were moving to understand their movements around the port and how that would be affected by some changes that they wanted to do to the port. So yeah, this was a bit of fun to create this bespoke app and bring the citizen science element in. And then I already mentioned these guys, but the sea lions in the Galapagos, this is extremely challenging. This is not an easy area to work in. The sea lions, again, it's kind of like once they're on, the loggers have to work, and they have to work for a long time. There's no second chance. So they've been doing this extensive study with the sea lions, looking at the bond between the sea lion mums and their pups. And so the loggers have been used to provide that data. And this is something really interesting where we said to them, but it's not going to collect data in the water. So you're only going to get data out of the water. Don't expect it in the water. And then Alex actually sent us footage of being able to collect data as the sea lions were playing in the water together. So we know that there's more that can be done there that's yeah, quite unexpected, which is very cool. This is obviously an extremely challenging environment for our very delicate loggers to work in. So there was an awful lot of work done to seal them and coat them and create these bespoke enclosures. Again, it was a 3D printed enclosure, but then it had to be sealed with epoxy because 3D printing is not strong enough to survive the Galapagos alone. It needs an awful lot of extra around it. So this question of how you seal it and how you put it on is really important. So yeah, this is also like, this is my current baby, my sheep system, where we're looking at mother-offspring relationships in the sheep to look at whether it's nature versus nurture in terms of lamb quality. And this is really nice because we put the larger loggers on the mums, as you can see here, but the lambs are tagged at birth with an ear tag, and actually that's where the mobile logger, the little logger, is attached. And because you can set the loggers to only advertise their ID, they're not scanning, they're only advertising their ID, the little loggers can actually last for weeks. So I think we collected data on the last experiment for 2.5 months using this system. And we're now going to tweak it to collect data for even longer. So there are lots of options about how you do the system, but yeah, this is like my new baby. So like I said, why would you use our system or not another system? At the moment, this is the smallest proximity logger on the market. Funnily enough, there's not a huge amount of competition to make these tiny loggers. I think you have to have a very specific need. But they are incredibly lightweight. So the fact that you can get them on animals so small is, yeah, is really nice. Like I said, they're very high resolution. So like in this situation, because these loggers are advertising only, we're still collecting data every 10 seconds. And we're able to collect it for 2.5 months using that system. So you get an awful lot of data back, depending on how you customize it. You've got the remote data recovery, and it is very customizable. Some of the caveats to bear in mind: it doesn't correlate linearly with distance, so you're not going to be super accurate. Not every point means something. It's all about picking signal out of noise rather than every point meaning something. And I always say that to manage people's expectations, because sometimes people come back and like, I've got all these points, but these 3 points are over here. And it's like, chuck it out, because that's noise. And there is noise in the system, and we can't do much about that because that is the Bluetooth signal. It doesn't work over long distances, like we said. If you're looking at migration or something like that, these are not the loggers for you, right? Like, you have to scale down your expectations. And if you are going to collect spatial information, you need some prior knowledge of where the animals will be. So yeah, so you need to have some idea. Same with the gateway. You need to have a rough idea of where you're going to put the gate, where your animals are going to come to download the data. Otherwise, getting that data offloading is going to be a struggle. Any questions at this point before I tell you how much it costs? Because probably you're all thinking, yeah, great, but how much money are you going to ask for this? Any questions? No? So these are the prices. We try and keep it as cheap as possible. Selfishly, because I only have limited grant money and I want to be using these loggers. And also because the value of this is that you can collect data on enough of the population. I've done a lot of work with tiny loggers with bats where you tag like 5 bats and then you say, oh, the entire population does this because of these 5 bats that were possibly the stupid ones that went into my net, right? Like that's not good enough. You want to be able to put them on a lot of animals. So we keep the costs as low as possible. The mobile logger is €105. And then the bespoke charger, so you can charge 10 of them at a time, that is €110 because that's actually quite a difficult bit of kit to get made. And then for the loggers, the version 1 logger is €115, 130 and 150 for the version 2 loggers based on the different antenna that you use. The gateway is an expensive bit of kit, so that's €400 and the app is free. And we also sell trial kits, so if you just want to have a play with the loggers, we sell 2 stationary loggers and 2 mobile loggers as a bundle for €400. Just so that you can play with them and have an idea whether or not they'll even work in your system without having to commit to anything too much. The gateway we don't provide in that trial kit because it's too expensive a piece of kit to make like that. So, any questions at this point? These prices are all ex-VAT and they are all subject to change because we are very much dependent on the whims of the market and usually what's happening between the US and China, which is not the most stable place to be at the moment. But we have only raised our prices, I think, like once or twice since we started, even with the whole semiconductor crisis. So we do try our best. But yeah, it is what it is. Okay. It's a lot of information. Are there any parts that people think, can you just explain that to me again or go over it again so I understand exactly how this works? Or do you want to just move on to the group activity straight away? Yeah, okay. So, we've all got the QR code. The first bit that we always do is like, okay, you're thinking about using the loggers. First questions we always ask is like, okay, who are you putting them on? Who is your study animal? So what I thought we could do here is, in this group on your tables, I don't know if you have particular study animals that you think, oh, maybe I could use this with, or whether you want to use your example stuffy of the teddy that I put on the table. I thought if we could just if you spend like 5-10 minutes having a quick discussion about these aspects. Who would your animal be if you were going to use it? How would you use it? That's interesting. Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so just to concentrate on these things here, what would your questions be? Like, how large would your animal be? What would you do? Cool. So we actually have some people who have used them on crabs. Yeah.
Told us, but
Yeah.
can you read? How far is the maximum
I guess that's
distance
why you
you
probably
can
have to post it in something, isn't it? Like with the bird.
So it depends on your animal that you're putting them on, and whether you are looking for proximity versus spatial information. So if you are looking for proximity and they are on animals that are on the ground, you get about 1 meter between them. So that's kind of like important because if you are a small mouse and you're more than a meter away, you're not actually in contact with each other. So this was the other struggle that I had looking at other systems, was they all said that they were in contact with each other when actually from a mouse perspective they're really not. If the animals are larger, so they're elevated, then you're looking at, I remember what it said on the screen there, we just done the test, but you're looking at more between like 5 to 15 meters. And then if you use the larger loggers, you can get up to like 20 meters. So it depends on the logger system that you use and what the question is. And then if you use the new version of the loggers, you're looking at something like 60 to possibly 90 meters, but we haven't finished the testing yet, so we don't know. Underwater, we don't know. So we have an MRES project advertised at the moment for a student to actually test some of these things out.
Because you said it was also used on crabs, but
Yeah.
it was on
So I think,
on the beach.
yeah, so she was using them on crabs on the beach. That was a study down in Exeter. So there, I don't know whether she actually looked at it in the water, but because of the experience in the Galapagos, we were like, okay, maybe we will look at it. So definitely underwater, you get at least a few cents. So you would know if they were coming into contact with each other. But I think that signal would degrade super quickly. So my hunch would be you would get maybe 30, 40 centimeters. Maybe more with the larger antennas. I don't know. But we haven't tested. Wow. So, any questions or still decide?
But we think it's more applicable in a zoo environment overall than in the wild, I guess, because of the range. So
Yeah, it's very species specific. So we're probably about half and half. But like for example, we've got the people using them on ant following birds. So like the birds they follow, and then when the ants swarm, they go in. And that was really interesting there because they didn't really know where the birds were going to go because it depends on the ants. So they used the loggers to kind of triangulate where they thought they were and then homed in based on that. So people are using them in really clever ways that we didn't necessarily initially intend.
I really like the one with the toads as well.
Yeah, it was so much fun. So yeah, like I think we would always say, okay, it depends on your question. And then we sit and we always talk through to say, will it answer that question or not? I think in zoo environments, there's an awful lot of potential because you have got that restricted environment. But yeah, we're finding people are using them on great tits in the wild, on bats, and they're still getting good data.
I was just wondering, because you were telling something about using them in aquatic environments in the water. You were saying, I'm not advising it, but still people are applying it? Okay. Do you want me to talk through? Okay. Okay. So people are still applying it in submersive environments?
They're trying. Yeah. This is why we say you take the trial kit, put it in your environment, do some tests.
What are the experiences? What are the outcomes?
So I thought it wouldn't work at all. I was incredibly negative about the idea. People have come back and said, oh no, we're getting stuff. So I was just saying over there, like I think you would lose range really quickly. But it depends on your question, right? If you want to know if they're within 30, 40 centimeters of each other, if that's like, that's actually quite close, then you would get probably some signal. Maybe with the new loggers, you'd get more. We've got an MRES waiting to start to actually try and investigate some of these effects in aquariums to actually test because, we never thought it would work. And then people came back and went, I put it in my bathtub and it worked. And you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Because I'm from Rotterdam Zoo and we have a colony of more than 40 Dalmatian pelicans.
Okay.
And it's hard to individually recognize these animals. And now we are in a project where we maybe are going to release some of these animals into the wild to see where they're going. And but now these animals are being selected at random, or for example, it's only sexually based bias, so only males will be taken out of the colony, which will be potentially being released. But my question is, how do we affect the social structure within this colony? But before we can answer that question, we need to get more insight. maybe we need like an aquatic tech for.
Yeah, are they always in the water then?
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends what you would then define as a contact, right? Like if you wanted to know if they were in the vicinity of each other, your vicinity is much smaller in the water, and we don't know exactly what it would be.
Yeah.
And it would also depend on like the quality of the water, the turbidity of the water. I think all of these things are probably important. So I would probably say just like test it. That's what we always say, just like test it and see. Or hopefully in a few months we actually have some answers where we can say we've had the opportunity to test it, and we know something more about it. But yeah, I mean, what we don't even know actually is with the new antenna, because these are actually like less than a month old, right? They're super new. That's why we've only just started testing them. We don't know whether they would increase the range. Probably they would. They've increased the range massively out of the water, so they could only increase it in the water. But I still think it would be it would be nowhere near what you get out of the water. It just depends on whether that kind of proximity would be enough information for you. Because the thing is that if you tried to do it with the GPS, you wouldn't get the resolution you needed either, because the GPSs aren't actually accurate enough for that kind of resolution. They weren't accurate enough for my mice, so.
Nocturnal.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. No. Any questions at all? Any questions at all before we?
My talk this morning was about Homo sapiens, and they get really pissed off if you strap trackers to them.
No, well, actually, no. We have had some people use them on people, yeah. So they were used in a hunter-gatherer study where they were put into bracelets, and then actually they were like, I want the bracelet. And it was a kind of prestige thing because it was tracking who got the most attention based on the hunting that they did and stuff. So, yeah, not my study. This is another study, but yeah, humans don't particularly like it, but people have applied. We had one person ask us if they wanted to buy them to use them in a children tracking study, and we actually said no, because I was like, I do not want to be responsible for these tags going on children when they're meant to be for animals, and I'm not comfortable with that. So we actually refused to give them the tags at that point.
We were actually having a serious conversation about motion tracking with elephants and stereotypical behaviour.
Oh, yeah.
They'd have to be very, very close to a sensor, wouldn't they, to pick up a sort of 10-metre movement variation, 10-centimetre movement variation?
Yeah.
Or have I misunderstood?
It's a very good question.
Because you said it would peak between sort of 10 and 30 centimetres. It's quite accurate, but that's proximity to a sensor, isn't it?
It is, and I think it would also depend. That is something where I would say talk to the engineer about the algorithmic ways we could, because he does amazing things with the algorithms so that we can tell like which order birds are perched on a branch and stuff like that. He's super smart in that area.
But if an elephant standing next to a sensor, it would pick it up. But if it was 2 meters away,
I would get worried that you would get too much. And like, where would the logger be? Would it be on like which part of the animal would you put the logger on to?
It would have to be the moving bit, I suppose.
The trunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then how do you do that?
Carefully and very respectfully.
Yeah.
You also put it on the tail because the whole animal is moving.
Oh, I see.
So they're also.
It's not our animal is moving the force.
Okay.
But there are also animals moving their head.
But you're doing the whole body.
Back and forth, so it's really, I don't know, maybe half a meter.
Then you could also just put it on the.
Well, you could put it on their tail. Like,
Yeah.
You really need I would guess you really need a motion tracker.
I think you would be better with an accelerometer. Yeah. And then you can.
hair on their back.
Yeah. But you can now get really nice So we are, if we get the funding that we've applied for, we're actually looking to put accelerometers into our loggers so that we can get that movement behavior, because we've done some really nice work with like llamas and alpacas and horses, actually looking at their movement and relating that to behavior for welfare and stress. I think that would be the route to go down rather than, so I think this probably wouldn't help for that.
So what is the experience? Because I know that I would need permission from our authority because it would be an animal experiment.
Yeah.
Do you have experience?
Well, I mean, when I do my experiments, yeah, I have permission, like I go through the individual ethics in terms of if people want to use them. Yeah, we sell them the loggers and they deal with the ethics themselves. So yeah, I don't know. I imagine for zoos, you probably have to do something quite different. I know for the vultures, we're very restricted, and it's kind of like, then we get the call from the zoo and they're like, right, you can do it in this very specific window, in this very specific moment. So yeah, it's probably like that. And it's always like, okay, we need them next week. And like, what? So yeah, cool.
Soon as a little bit of court came.
Okay. So, did people have an animal that they were using that they would want to put it on? Any questions that came up when you were discussing it? No? Do people have an example animal they would put it on?
Well, it's none of our animals, but maybe ground squirrels would work.
Ah, yeah, we've put them on squirrels before. And again, it turned out the squirrels were doing all kinds of behavior we weren't expecting. Yeah, there was a lot of extramarital behavior going on that wasn't expected at that time of year. So, yeah. Anyone else had any thoughts?
We kind of settled on mouse lemurs, but still discussions ongoing.
And how would you actually put the collar on? How would you attach it?
Yeah, that's not something.
So you'll see, like, on your table, there's lots of bits and pieces, and these are all examples from different studies where these kinds of materials have been used. So, for example, like this plastic, you can get this plastic, and then you just use like a heat sealer, like a little plastic crimper, and you can make really nice little pockets. So this can actually work quite well because it's pretty tough and durable, but very easy to take off. Cable ties. Most of the stuff, to some extent, is cable ties. I think there's also pictures there where you can see how different loggers have been put into different settings. So if you can create something like a 3D printed mount, that's usually the best for if you're putting it in a zoo environment. But yeah, there's a lot of different options. There's also things like Velcro. So if you want something that's not going to last for very long, there's a lot of like gluing Velcro to the back of animals so it then falls off and you can recover it without stressing the animal out. Okay. The other question that you want to know is like how long you want to collect the data for, and there we just say we have got a battery calculator on the website, and you can play around with that to kind of have an idea of how long you might want to collect the data for, because it will tell you how long the loggers will last. The next kind of question is, okay, what's your actual study question? What are you trying to answer? How long do you need to collect the data for? How many animals are you going to collect the data on? Do you need social or spatial data only? And here I would say if you open the app, so I think there is an instruction option, sorry, where is it? One of the sheets of paper has, yeah, there it is, has a picture of the mobile phone app with information about what all the different parts mean. If you click on the three, so if you swipe right on the, left, on the three dots, you get the config screen that opens. So if you don't connect, it's because probably somebody has connected to a logger you're trying to connect to. So if you press configure, the only logger that you shouldn't connect to is 367 because that's a demo logger, so it won't actually connect with you properly. But you can connect and go onto this screen. So I've put quite a lot of loggers around so that hopefully everyone can connect to one and have a look. And you'll see all the options there. So you can turn scanning on and off. What this means is that your logger can be scanning for other IDs. That's energetically expensive. Or it can just be advertising its ID only so it can last for an awful lot longer. You can also hide your logger. So that means you can be looking for other loggers in the environment, but you're not scanning, you're not advertising your own ID. So like for your stationary loggers, you don't want them to fill up other loggers. The loggers can hold about 10,000 logs. So you can collect an awful lot of data. But if the logger dies and you haven't downloaded your data, it's lost. So don't rely on the logger. Use your gateway. Have it downloading data fairly regularly so that you don't lose your data. But if your animal disappears for a while and then it comes back, you can actually get, you can have quite a lot of logs on it. So that can be quite useful. But you can also see lots of things. So you can change your scan interval. So that's how often your logger is listening. And you can, and you have settings there that mean you can optimize your battery consumption. If you were ever using the loggers, we sit and talk you through all of these options and we tell you which ones to use and how best to optimize it because, it's important to get that bit right. So I'll just let you have a play, collect some loggers, mess around with them. They should be, it's all the stationary loggers, so they're a bit more robust than the mobile loggers. There. Any questions? Oh, don't shut down the logger. Yeah, if you shut down the logger, I have to plug it in to revive it again. So I think it does have a warning, right? To say only do this if you're certain.
My hand kind of
don't do it. I can revive them again, so it's fine. But that's for if you're not going to use the loggers for a while. It's like a stasis mode you can put them in, so that they last a bit longer. Yeah.
I have a question. So the RSSI, that's the strength of the signal,
yes,
right? And it's measured in dB?
Decibels, yeah.
Decibels?
Yeah.
Why is that?
That's how you measure Bluetooth. Yeah, that is because it's a measure of basically the strength of the sound that it's receiving in that sense, right? So that's why we say it's kind of like shouting and listening. And it's a reverse, no, it's an inverse log scale, sorry, I should say. So it's a negative number, but closer to, like the larger the number, the closer to zero the number, the better. And then, kind of goes down to like what, -92 is when your loggers are basically getting out of range. But it's just how Bluetooth signal is measured.
Okay.
But yeah.
There's different ones.
Oh yeah, don't click update if you see update on the thing, because
And it kind of gets stuck there for us. Maybe we
scroll down and see if there's one further down that people aren't connecting to.
tried a few actually, and they're all stuck, I think. Maybe.
Why did I just put my? Because you should. Yeah, so it's connecting for me.
Okay. So
What are you Android or iPad?
Android.
iPad or iPhone. It might be because there's an awful lot of signal in the room.
Sure. Yeah.
So, because it is connecting for me, try and connect. What's this one? So only do it one at a time. 1218. So if one of you tries to connect to it,
I try.
because you're very close to that one.
What do you mean? Like Zoom in the miles? Like...
But it's, that's strange because mine is connecting. I think,
Can you refresh again? Do you think that could be something?
Yeah, so you can always close and reopen the app, turn it on and off again. It's all, but it should connect. That's strange.
Interesting would be to see across the entire year if they have readings.
Yeah, so okay, we can have a play on mine if you're, because there it's, oh no, you've connected, there you go. So,
Nice.
yeah, so yeah, you can see in the options there, you have, like for the scanning, if you click on the scanning interval, like the scan interval there is overall efficiency, advertising efficiency, and then the advanced settings. We only say use the advanced settings if you've spoken to us, and we will tell you exactly what to put in there, because if you get that wrong, your loggers actually can't log each other. They go out of sync and they can't recognize each other. So we say only do that if, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, it's still.
Any questions at all, or good? Oh. Is it not downloading for you?
I couldn't get back, so I didn't receive. I think I went too far.
Okay.
And I couldn't get back, but then when I downloaded the other app, I got in anyways.
Okay.
So I haven't gotten in with the email, but it was kind of like it asked for the code. And I couldn't and then I deleted it and reinstalled it, but it still sent me to the
Impossible to open here.
Oh. And it's an iPhone, so I never know what to do with iPhones.
Let's download Test Flight first.
You have to, yeah, you need Test Flight.
Yeah, but he told me to tell my email address and then never receive the email, and then it's blocked, so you need to have the code.
If you want, have a play on my phone, because I don't know how to fix Apple phones, and it won't work after the conference anyway. The app will inactivate. So feel free to have a play on my phone, because, yeah, sorry, I can't fix Apple issues. Okay. So, does anyone have any questions, thoughts based on this, like how you would set the study up? What kind? No? So we've seen people do quite a wide variety of different things here, but it's really kind of whatever suits your question. And then, oh, is that the last one? Yeah. So the last thing that we always consider is you then have to think, okay, you've got a system, you've got a question, how are you going to calibrate it? And this is really important, because if you are in like a really stable environment, then okay, you don't need to do so much calibration because everything is the same everywhere. But if you have a combination of open and cluttered environments, then you actually need to calibrate across the open environment and across the cluttered environment, because that structural complexity makes a difference to Bluetooth signal. If they're going in and out of the water, you need to do it in and out of the water. If they're going on the ground and on the air, you need to do it on the ground and on the air. So the calibration process can be a little bit like, it's a bit time consuming, it's a little bit boring, but you can put a podcast on, listen to music while you're doing it. So yeah, just because it's Bluetooth, your Bluetooth headset still works perfectly fine with your phone. But yeah, you kind of have to think about the environment very carefully when you think about this. The other thing you want to think about is, well, do you want these distance bins, in which case you need to do these regular measurements, or do you just want to know when they're in the proximity? Because actually, if all you want to know is what being in the proximity is, you say, okay, as soon as they've got a signal of like -80 or higher, I'm pretty confident that they've done a contact or they're near to the resource I'm interested in or something like that. That can change how you do your calibration. So it needs to be sort of fitted around that. You also have to think about temperature and humidity ranges, because humidity, it's water, really affects Bluetooth signal. So if it's suddenly really raining, you will see a reduction in the signal. So you do need to think about that. Not super high, but enough that like you just might want to think about that. So that's kind of important to think about. We also see an impact of cold. So when it's really cold, we also see an impact, probably because the loggers don't like it, right? Their batteries and the component parts, they're not really a fan of cold temperatures, so they'll work fine, but they won't work to the same degree because it will change the tolerances in there. So yeah, if you're calibrating the system, you kind of want to consider all of these points when you're doing that. You also want to think about your sealant and where you're putting it on the animal. If you put a logger on a mouse, you can put it on the back of the neck as much as you want. It's going to slide down onto the front of the neck. So that antenna is going to be spending most of the time putting the signal into the floor in front of it. So it's going to affect the signal. So when you're doing your calibration, also think about where is it going on the animal. Things like the vultures, one of the challenges that we've had with the vultures is that they're quite large birds. They've got the loggers in rings on their legs. So you can have two birds stood next to each other, but one logger is here and one logger is here because they're on the opposite legs. And that is a contact in the same way as when the birds are stood with the rings touching each other. So again, there's a lot of like post-processing, but also thinking about relaxing constraints to say we're going to count all of that as a contact because the way the animal stands makes a difference to the signal. So there's all these things to also consider when you're putting the logger on to know what a meaningful log is. Okay? That's kind of the main point, like the main points of using the system, of how you can kind of get really good data, but also a lot of caveats to be aware of and to think about when you're doing them. Does anyone have any final questions? Like even if you're thinking, what about this species? We may have tried them on that species. Feel free to ask. You can also get in touch with us through the IoSA website as well if you have more questions. We're always quite happy to answer questions. Yeah,
regarding temperature, how do you work with that? Like during the COVID months, where you've been tracking them for a while?
So it's really like extreme ranges that it's a problem. And so it's kind of more like for my mice in Tanzania, for example, like during the day it was getting up to about 50 degrees in some of the areas. So the stationary loggers would have been affected. My mice are underground then anyway, so it's fine. But if you have a species that's moving in those temperature ranges, because we notice, okay, the temperature, like when it goes really cold, it's affecting it, and when it goes really hot, it's affecting it. It's something we do say to people to be cautious about. It's not affecting it in the sense that like the loggers stop working or they become, you know, dangerous or anything. So I remember at one point the engineer said to me, oh, these chips, you know, they've only got a thermal tolerance of up to 120 degrees. And I was like, well, if an animal's wearing a collar and it's gone up to 120 degrees, the animal has bigger problems than like the collar that it's wearing. So it's not that like they're out of tolerance, but it does impact the Bluetooth signal. And so if you're working across these ranges, you would probably want to consider it. Anything else? No? Well, okay, thank you. Well, I hope it's been like an interesting exposure to the system. If you have questions or anything, you can always get in touch. Myself and Ivan will do our best to answer any questions. Thank you.